So we are now recording, and Rabbi Feldman, please begin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Greetings, everybody. It's good to see everybody again. This is part 2 of our first half of the afterlife and then some. And we're going to take a break next week, and then we're going to go for 2 weeks talking about human suffering, human reflection, the meaning of life, all that good stuff. Right now, I don't have access to the whiteboard, but I can get it in a second. I just want to point out that it says exactly what we said last week. We used that paradigm. Let me try to get it up here. We used that paradigm. Okay, great. To explain the Jewish perspective on the afterlife. I'll repeat it now just a bit for those who might have missed it last week. And we're going to refer to it again after they finish with the afterlife, okay? If you've ever had a transcendent or peak experience, right, how would you describe your experience? Is it one of melting? Is it one of dissolving? And there's 2 sources of dissolution there I'm talking about. First, to dissolve as sugar or salt wood in water, or to dissolve as coloring wood in water. So if a drop of blue coloring, a drop of red coloring in water would dissolve. Or would you become transported? Okay? Now, obviously, if you melt, you're still there. You just somehow blend it into the background. And it takes a fairly long time, let's say for butter to melt, okay? If during this transcendent or peak experience, for example, you're studying a deep text, reflecting about God, listening to high opera, having had a child, being in love, things of that nature, okay? Going through that transcendent peak experience, you either melt, you dissolve in the ways you experience, or you are transported. My contention that the Jewish reflection on death is that one is transported in that most peak of and transcendence of experiences in our lifetime or after our lifetime. That rather than melting or dissolving, one is transported. We won't get into it much more now, but just suffice it to say that last week we said that at the moment of death, one is transported elsewhere. That's the Jewish take on it. And then there's a series of melting and dissolving phenomena I was going through, and et cetera, et cetera. It's my contention that peak transcendence experience will translate itself onto another plane after the world itself, so to speak, goes to a near-death experience and finally does die, is transformed and turns into a whole other and transported to a whole other phenomena. We'll explain that now. Last week we covered the moments according to the Jewish tradition before one passes away, what one experiences, as one passes away, and soon after one passes away. This week now we're going to finish off the afterlife, and we're going to go into heaven or hell, okay? Feel free to ask your questions on the chat room down the bottom there, okay? Ask a question. I might not get to it, or I might decide we'll deal with it at the end, or whatever. There are a bunch of us, and there are going to be some people who are going to be watching it later on, because they can't be with here just on the spot. So if you want to ask for others' sake, that would be great too. The point of the matter is we're going to be discussing now heaven and hell from the Jewish perspective and then some. Okay. So the heaven experience, according to us, is the experience of the Garden of Eden. Now, you know, of course, from the Torah, that the Garden of Eden is where Adam and Eve were placed after they were created. Where they were before the Garden of Eden is another question altogether. That's not our concern right now, but eventually, soon after, they were placed in the Garden of Eden. Okay? As you will recall, they were expelled from the Garden of Eden and they went to live in the world that we experience now. So there's much discussion. We don't have time for it now in the Haritic literature and Kabbalistic literature about leaving the Garden of Eden. But the point of the matter is, as a metaphor, they left the Garden of Eden, and we want to go back there. Okay, that's home. That's where it was good. Okay, that's the experience we want to return to. Those were the good old days. Okay, that's what we want to get back to. All right. So there's an argument in the tradition as to whether the Garden of Eden is in fact a physical phenomenon. Can it be found somewhere in the Middle East? Right. In fact, there's an argument it's not in the Middle East; it's in Africa. But be that as it may, there are certain great sages who wrote whole books about that, and one of the most famous of whom is Nachmanides Ramban, who wrote something called Torah Adam, and he discusses these kinds of things, and others did of that. Yov wrote books about and articles about this too. All right, so there's a physical Garden of Eden according to those opinions, and one can find it in theory if one wants to look for it. And perhaps it's in Israel, perhaps it's in that area, perhaps it's in Africa. Okay. But there are some opinions that no, it's not a physical place whatsoever. It's strictly a and okay. Let me ask you for his person. One study they do, and they don't quite understand what's happening to them. Maybe they think they're going crazy. They're seeing people from the other side, or maybe they don't experience it because it is a sudden and less than gentle experience. It's a very good question. I appreciate that sharing. Okay, let's go back now to the Garden of Eden. So we hold this. Most people contend that it's a spiritual realm rather than a physical realm. Okay, so we're going to quote from certain classical sources now. If you want to take out your pen and pencil to write down these sources, feel free. First is the Midrash on the book of Psalms 6 and 31:6. Before the righteous enter the Garden of Eden, God shows them what they might have been merited in hell. Okay? Similarly, when the non-righteous go into hell, they're first shown a place that might have been accorded in the Garden of Eden. This is an interesting phenomenon. Take another path, you'll wind up elsewhere. Okay? I remember dwelling on this years and years ago. Gosh, if I just make this turn here, I'll end up elsewhere altogether. I mean, it's oftentimes not as dramatic as that. But if you make a decision that, let's say, invest in something, here's a clear, manifest example here. If you invest in one stock and it zooms up, you're suddenly wealthy, or you're certainly comfortable, more comfortable than you might have thought. If you invest in another stock, you might lose all the money you have, etc. And it could very well happen overnight. We can make spiritual decisions of that ilk too. Something I do or say or think now can change the very course of my life. Something you and I together here now, by experiencing what we are experiencing here together, can change the course of our collective lives. And there might be some kind of revelation passed between us that will change all of us together at the same time. Okay? So that's the experience of the Garden of Eden, experience of Gehenna or of hell. Okay? So after one passes away, and one is, God forbid, destined for hell, then one is then shown, had you made another decision, it would have been elsewhere. It would have been in the Garden of Eden. Conversely, if you're going to heaven, the Garden of Eden, you're shown, had you made yet another decision, you would have gone elsewhere, which is to say, Gehenna or hell.
Where's my
one is always free to make those series of choices, unless we're talking about something rather radical and interesting. Calls for many decisions in a lifetime. Somebody has their mic on, please. If you will, mute yourself. Okay.
My webcam. They don't need my webcam.
If they can mute themselves,
I don't need phone.
I'm hearing somebody. Okay. Then we move on ahead. Now we're quoting now from the Yalkut Shimoni. Yalkut Shimoni is a delightful series of midrash, and it's rather literary.
Why do I want my webcam?
Thing
It's ridiculous.
one might not otherwise see in other midrashim. Okay, so I'm going to read from that now here. It's fairly lengthy. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to write them down. And the person who's not hearing, please, if you would mute yourself, or if someone would take care of that, one of the guys in the background, please. Okay, Gan Eden has two gates, a ruby by which stands the luster of the face of each of them glistens at the splendor of the firmament.
To be the webcam.
The person arrived in white robes of the clouds of glory.
Just really.
Set two crowns upon his head.
And I did their testing a couple days ago.
The other was gold, etc., etc. Jeff, if we can somehow use the other.
Microphone on, everybody can please use your microphone.
Johnny Ross, check. Thank you. Okay. And the Yalkut Shimoni goes on to describe the experience in rather flowery language. Goes on to say in every corner of Gan Eden there are 80 myriad species of trees, the most inferior of them being finer than all the aromatic plants of this world, etc., etc. So we're given this ideal place. Now, many of the holy ones have foreseen.
Please mute my microphone.
And they've described
asking me
for
to mute
them
my microphone. I don't know how to do that.
Oh, he's asking you to me. Yeah. Okay, Sonny, hi. You're on with us. Nice to see you. Okay, I believe you've cut off your microphone.
Fine.
Okay. Be that as it may.
Okay,
So the experience of, I'm glad you can join us. The experience of, that is the experience of the Garden of Eden. The most exemplar experience in the Garden of Eden is that of studying Torah with God. Okay? As one can imagine, that would be rather intimidating. If one can imagine, that would be rather intense. Okay? So the greatest experience in the Garden of Eden is studying Torah with God. And that's to be taken, of course, on a metaphoric level because there's nothing physical. There are no physical books there whatsoever. And there are no physical seats there whatsoever. But the metaphor is one examines the truth of things with God there. Okay, if, God forbid, someone is not good in their life, they go through this experience referred to as Gehenna. Let's just say that Gehenna will last tops 12 months. Okay? Period. Except for very rarely evil, wicked individuals. Okay? Most people will need to be cleansed. I dare say all of us will need to be cleansed in the experience of Gehenna, God forbid, will need to be cleansed in that experience. It's a purging untoward elements of our being. It's the school of hard knocks, the school of hardest knocks of all. But one will not be there forever. We will not be there forever. Certain rare individuals are there forever. Okay? The most wicked of all are there forever. Most people are there for tops 12 months, some for only 11 months. The righteous dip in and dip out, because even the righteous are being human, are capable of humanity and fatal flaws. So they will dip in for a bit, be expunged and dip out and go straight up to the Garden of Eden. But in Gehenna, we close on now in the Talmud in Eruvin, page 19a, even at the very gates of Gehenna, it's still possible to repent before God. That's very heartwarming. It means to say, to the very last moment, you can realize you were wrong. Okay? You can realize you were wrong. You will realize that we've all made mistakes, but we're talking about you and I particularly at that particular moment. It will be a private moment when we will have been transported, right? And God will say to you, have you any remarks? You'll say, gosh, I never realized. I'm sorry. I'm just terribly, terribly sorry. I regret ever having done such and such and such and such and such and such. So there's always a chance. There's always a last moment reprieve. Okay? The Garden of Eden is not Dante's Inferno. I don't know how many of you have ever studied Dante's Inferno. Okay? Dante's Inferno has horrendous experiences of going up in flames forever and ever, or sitting shivering in ice and snow forever and ever. We don't talk about that, and that's not the Jewish explanation of the reality of being purged of one's sins. If a person continues to say in Eruvin 41b, if a person's life was full of suffering, okay, such a case, as a poor person, one afflicted with various diseases, one held in captivity by an oppressor, such an individual will be exempt from Gehenna. Okay, that's comforting also. In other words, if you go through hell alone, you won't go through hell again. Okay, I'm uncomfortable using the word hell because it has un-Jewish tinges to it. Okay, it gives us an impression again of Dante's Inferno, and it gives us an impression of the devil. We have a very different experience and explanation of the devil. We'll explain some of that when we turn the last session. We turn upon the Book of Job, where the devil shows up. Okay, so we have a question now from Scott. Okay, what sort of evil behavior would merit forever in hell? Someone like Hitler and Stalin and my third grade teacher. Okay, people of that ilk. Serious, but I'm talking about my third grade teacher. Seriously wicked people. Okay, others of that ilk. Okay, we're talking about seriously evil. Thank you for that question, Scott. So if you've suffered in your life, God forbid, you won't suffer after your life. You will have suffered enough. God has compassion. God has more compassion than not compassion. We'll go on. Exodus Rabbah, Shmos Rabbah. After going down to Gehenna and receiving the punishment to him, the sinner is forgiven from all his iniquities. And like an arrow from the bow, he's flung straight out of Gehenna. And he's purified and able to enter the eternal postmortem realm of the Garden of Eden. Okay? Which is to say, once you've done your time, you're released. Boom. You don't go back there. It's a cleansing process. I describe it jocularly as a car wash. Okay? With all kinds of brushes going around and water coming out, the water coming at you, all kinds of places like that, because you need to get expunged, you need to get cleansed. It's uncomfortable. It's hellish. Okay? He'd rather not have to go through that in Halavai. Please God, would we learn our lessons here in life so as not to need to be purified, not to need to be cleansed, right? if you've ever been humbled, if someone pointed out a fault on your part and said, so-and-so, you do this, you do that, you need to work on that, and you take that to heart, right? It eats at your kisses, right? Somehow it makes you uncomfortable. It belittles yourself in your own eyes, right? That process of discomfort and being belittled in one's own eyes, of suffering, of really realizing how wrong one has been, right? Parenthesis, not everybody does realize how wrong they will have been, and some people would argue against the other person who is altruistically pointing out their faults and saying, no, I'm not mistaken, you're mistaken, but we're not talking about that kind of person, close parenthesis. But if someone, again, says to me, Feldman, when you do this, it's wrong. It's just wrong. And if I think about it, I said, gosh, I never realized. You're right. Gosh, that's embarrassing. I didn't know that. You're right. And, I didn't realize how wrong I had been. That experience of, right, and regret, and that taking it upon myself to change myself again, to do tshuva, that's an aspect of hell. That's an aspect of Gehenna. I have another question from Gary. What about souls that are reincarnated and return to this world because they did not fulfill a mission in their life? Good question, Gary. We'll get to reincarnation. Right after hell is reincarnation itself. Okay? Good question. Thank you very much. But again, according to the Yerushalmi, the Palestinian Talmud in Sanhedrin 29b, again, we're only there for 12 months top. Okay? So, if you're embarrassed, to go back to our case, okay, if someone points out a fault on your part, and you're embarrassed, and truthfully, it's only lasting for 60 seconds, feels like a year to you, okay? If you're a sensitive soul, right, and the person pointing it out to you is saying to you point blank, you're wrong, and you realize the reality of what they're saying, that the reality is that what they're saying is right, that minute can seem like a year to you because you're ruminating within your picture. Gosh, how many times have I done that same stupid thing over and over again? Gosh, I wish I had heard this 30 years ago, etc. That is your year in hell, so to speak. Okay, let's continue now. Someone has a question? Okay. Sonia asked a very good question. I'm hearing something short. Oh, God. I have some kind of feedback. All right. Somebody asked a very sensitive and important question. A person suffers from clinical depression, God forbid, and commits suicide. Does that kind of death go through similar cleansing as the death of natural causes? Yeah. I mean, it used to be that at one time we thought that if you committed suicide, you're going against God, and you're doing it to prove that you don't believe in God. But we realize today now, and most rabbis understand and explain it, that clinical depression is an illness, and that one cannot be blamed for that. And whereas in the past it had been common practice among our people to bury people who were, God forbid, committed suicide outside the gate of the Jewish cemetery, no longer the case. If a person, God forbid, commits suicide, they're buried the normal way and everything happens. One says cottage for them, etc. But you don't want to do that because you are forestalling the time given to you by God. And frankly, from a psychological level, someone explained, again, I'm a hospital rabbi, and people talk to me quite bluntly oftentimes about these kinds of things. If someone was suffering from a bad disease and says, Rabbi, if I had the guts, I'd commit suicide. I'm just too much of a chicken. I can't do that kind of stuff. I'm jumping off of a bridge, etc., etc. So I said, well, so-and-so, we'll call him Bill. I said, Bill, not only is it bad for you to commit suicide, but committing suicide starts a trend in a family. The suicides run in the family. So if you're not going to Think of yourself, think of your children, your grandchildren, nephews, nieces, etc., etc. Okay? But thank you for the question. All right, we're going to leave hell now. Okay? Just want to get into one point here. Hell is closed for Shabbos and Yom Tov. Okay? So all the people who are experiencing this terrible experience of Gehenna, when it starts Friday night through Shabbos through Saturday night, they're free. Boom. Okay? They're out of hell. Hell is closed down. Okay? The walls become chilly and everything is pulled down. And comes Shabbos and everybody's out of hell. Comes Yom Tov, everybody's out of hell. And everybody's experiencing the Garden of Eden. Come Saturday night, so I'm sorry, but you go back to Gehenna. Okay? Another question, since most people experience some suffering in life, are most absolved from the hell of which you speak? Good question. It's a hard one to call. Okay? Every time that you experience some kind of hardship in life, that's one bit of hell you're experiencing. But perhaps there is a qualitative difference of your experience of hell, a quantitative difference of the experience of hell later on. It's hard to call. Okay? Certainly there is a lot of experiencing of hardship in life, and one would imagine that God takes mercy on that, as we indicated as well before from the Midrash. Okay. We're going to talk about reincarnation now. Good. Someone raised that question before. We believe in reincarnation. Okay? It hadn't been talked about for the longest time. People didn't know we believe in reincarnation. But it's talked about, the Kabbalists talked about it, and they said we always believed it. There was a great rabbi in the 11th century named Rabbi Yaakov, who says believing in reincarnation is nonsense. Rabbi Yaakov was like a great rabbi and a holy soul, and a major leader of the Jewish religion. He said it's nonsense, so how dare we say otherwise? What it means to say is others of that ilk, or nearly that ilk, were saying that reincarnation is real. So Rabbi Yaakov is arguing against their considered opinion. It's not the be-all and end-all of decisions about reincarnation. Reincarnation in Hebrew is referred to as Gilgul, which is basically returning in cycles, okay? So there's an argument how many times you come back. There is one case you come back one time, get your act together. There's another opinion you come back 3 times. And there's a considered major opinion that you come back many times you have to. Truth be known, you don't want to come back. You don't want to have temples again. You don't want to have to deal with 6th grade again. You don't want to have to do all that kind of stuff. It'd be great if you finish with that and just get on to heaven. Okay, wouldn't that be super? But we are given another chance. We are here to rectify this, that, and the other thing. And if somehow, unbeknownst to you, you don't rectify what you are intended to rectify in this life, you get another chance. Okay? Good. That covers the afterlife. We're going to go now until the next experience, which is the universal afterlife. The world will have a transcendent and peak experience. Okay? We're not talking about war, God forbid. We're not talking about global war, global warming, or we're not talking about global destruction. God forbid. God promised never to destroy the world again as we know it. It will be destroyed on a spiritual level, but that's not what we're talking. That is what we're talking about. Okay. All right. So the world itself will experience. Let's go back to our whiteboard. The world itself will experience a transcendent peak experience. Will it melt? No. Will it dissolve in one of 2 ways, which is to say like salt and sugar in water, which if you mix up slowly dissolves, and the water tastes a bit salty, or tastes a bit sweet, but it's basically water. Or will the world be transported elsewhere? The answer is again, the world will be transported elsewhere into a whole other experience. Okay. Okay, Barry asked a great question. Why do some need to be cleansed into him and others experience the world as part of Gilgal? It's a deep and important question, but it's a case-by-case instance, okay? One cannot say in general. One cannot speak in general about those kinds of rules. It's a case-by-case, instance-by-instance, so kind of experience, okay? So, the world will experience the revelation of the Mashiach. Okay? The Messiah will finally arrive. Okay. Now, the Messianic experience is part of the transportation experience of the universe. Okay? Things will get a little weird. Okay? After the 6,000 years of the spiritual struggle of the world, things will get a little weird. There'll be two Messiahs, okay? Mashiach ben Yosef, Mashiach ben David. The Josephite Messiah and the Davidic Messiah, okay? The Josephite Messiah will arrive first. He will fight various battles on the physical plane, and the usual opinion is that he will die in the process. So an argument is to say he will not die, but the usual understanding is that the initial Messiah, Mashiach ben Yosef, right, the Josephite Messiah, will die fighting the battle. He will be followed by the Davidic Messiah, King Mashiach, Melech HaMashiach, will be King David. King David will be brought back, and he will do what he was meant to do. All right, now, there's a lot to be said about this, okay? The whole idea of messianism, okay, is like this idea of a Superman, okay? And in fact, if you've ever read Superman comics, right, when you were a kid like I did, all the time, you might know that they were written and created by Bruce Timm, okay? So here you have this Superman figure, this figure who came from another planet, right? And he did all kinds of, he was a force of goodness in the world, and he couldn't be corrupted, and he did all he could to make the world good. So that's a very Jewish take on it. So these guys who wrote Superman, created and illustrated Superman, were Jewish guys. That's where they were coming from. Now, all right, so there's all kinds of takes on it. Many people have messianic complexes, okay? America perceives itself as a messianic phenomenon. America has seen itself as the Messiah of the world. America has seen itself as the great savior of the world, bringing democracy into the world. That might be said to be going on even now. At the beginning, America, to its credit, was democratic and allowed for a lot of good things to go on, including votes, etc. A lot of bad things went on too, including slavery and the destruction of the native population. But that chutzpah, right, to allow for slavery, to allow for the destruction of the native population, to kill all the buffaloes, to take over the West, etc., that messianic drive, that chutzpah, is the dark side of the messianic phenomenon, okay? But we're not talking about that. Overall, the messianic experience is a popular experience, okay? Which means to say, Mashiach will not come as a prince comes from a line of kings, right? Mashiach will come from the people. Joseph started out as a kid. He was 17 years old in Egypt. He had this great idea, right? He told Pharaoh how to run the country. Joseph foresaw that things were going to get a little hairy, so he foresaw it would be great if Pharaoh, the king, could save up all the grain and food, etc., etc. So he rose up from being a commoner to a king. He's made second in command in Egypt under Pharaoh. David was a commoner. In fact, he was a shepherd, okay? David was a singer and a poet, and he didn't have any aspirations for kingship whatsoever. He had this great ability, though. He fought against Goliath, and he was a charismatic individual. Didn't come from kings. He wasn't a judge. He wasn't a this or that. He was a commoner. That's the Jewish understanding of the Mashiach, okay? Mashiach will not be this person who inherits it. Mashiach will be a common individual, albeit a learned individual, albeit a pious and a righteous individual, right, who will make things right for us. Okay, now, there's a lot of ground to cover, so we're going to do the best that we can. So after this messianic transported experience, okay, so there are two opinions about that. Will it be a rural experience, a messianic experience, or will it be a here and there in this world experience? So my mind needs to understand the statement in the Talmud. In chapter Shabbat, page 63a, the only difference between this world and the messianic age is subjugation to foreign rule. This means to say, well, if the land of Israel, you won't have to be under non-Jewish rule. So that's a rather unrural kind of experience. So my mind says in Hilchot Tshuva, that chapter 9 in number 2, and that's why all of Israel, as well as the prophets and sages, have always longed for the days of the Messiah. My mind said, for it is then that we will be freed from the rule of governments that do not allow us to engage in Torah study or mitzvot, as we should in order to peaceably grow in wisdom, thus by merit life in the world to come. For in those days, knowledge, wisdom, and truth will increase. Okay? He takes it as a very fine life of world of peace, world of growth and wisdom and understanding. Continuing for the king who will arise from the seed of David will be even greater faith than Solomon, will be an almost as great a prophet as Moses. It's an argument if he will be as almost as great as Moses or greater than Moses after all. He, the Messiah, will know the Torah of Moses, so, and then some. So ergo, some will argue that he, the Mashiach, will be even greater than Moses. So we'll go back to the Maimonides. He will accordingly teach and guide the people in the ways of God and have all the nations listen to him. And while the ultimate merit and the ultimate display of eternal goodness will be life in the world to come, the Messianic age will come about in this world, which will continue on its way. The only difference being that sovereignty will return to Israel. Okay? Fine. So, Herzl could have been described as Messianic. Those who are Zionistic would say, yes, God gave him the ability to give us back the land of Israel. Those are non-Zionistic or anti-Zionistic who say, no, Herzl was the flip side of the Messiah, and he got it all wrong. Okay, so that's this worldly view of the Messiah. The Ramban, Nachmanides, has a rural view of the Messiah when he says, since the time of creation, man has had the ability to do as he pleased, to be righteous or wrongful. That's our free will. This ability applies likewise to the entire Torah period so that the people can gain merit upon choosing the good and punishment for preferring wrongdoing. But in the days of Mashiach, the choice of their good will be natural. In other words, you won't have free will anymore. It's just working off of your gut. You will intuitively know what is good and do what is good. The heart will not desire what's improper and will have no craving for it. This is the quote, circumcision mentioned of the heart. The lust and desire are the foreskin of the heart, and circumcision of the heart means it will no longer covet or desire wrongdoing, which is a whole other order of humanity. Okay, we will be angelic in the Messianic era. This is a decidedly more woo-woo explanation. Barry asked the question, where is that Ramban thing, I'm guessing right, located? The Ramban is in Torat Adam, okay? I don't believe it's in English, though it might be. And if it would be, the Rabbi Chavel's translation, Chavel, has a translation of many parts of the more philosophical parts of Ramban, of Nachmanides, okay? Then, after the Messiah will have been here, some want to say for 1,000 years, right? The entire seventh millennium, okay? Grandchildren, etc., will go on and rule, and the world will either be this perfect woo-woo situation or not. But in other words, it will still be greater than it is today. There will come to be a day of judgment. Okay. Think Nuremberg. Okay. There's nothing more righteous than the Nuremberg trials in our experience in our time in history. Okay. When the wicked were set before judges, judgment was rendered, and they were slaughtered for their wicked deeds. Okay? Perhaps you do. I was a young kid. I remember the Eichmann trial. I remember seeing Eichmann. My parents made a point of having the TV on then and watching the Eichmann trial, seeing him behind those glass doors. I remember it distinctly. I've seen it subsequently, and of course, in the historical presentation, but I remember seeing it live too. That's the day of judgment. Okay? Think of the Eichmann trial or the Nuremberg trial. Okay? There will be a day of judgment. And God Almighty will point out, okay, here's where it's at. Okay? Now, something in the human heart believes in fairness. Okay? Now, if you're a parent or you remember your own childhood, you know that kids say, that's not fair. That's just not fair. There's an inborn experience of fairness. Where does that come from? It's because it's called the conscience or whatever. The truth of the matter is sometimes unfair is fair and fair is unfair. Not so clear, but I'm just dealing with the idea that there's this inborn phenomenon of a sense of righteousness, a sense of right and wrong. There will be a day of judgment. And then there'll be a resurrection of the dead. Now, okay, there's a lot of material. I'm going to read out some of the text from the Torah, from the books of Tanakh for you about that. If you're looking for references to the day of judgment, look at Vayikra Rabbah 4:5 and Sanhedrin 91a. Okay, here's the resurrection of the dead. I'm going to read you some fairly lengthy quotes from Ezekiel. Now, our people have always believed in the resurrection of the dead, okay? This is an old tradition, okay? If you believe in reincarnation, it's because you see that fall follows the summer, winter follows the fall, and the spring comes back after the winter, which is to say life returns. Just as life returns to the earth, if you believe in reincarnation, life returns to the earth. If you believe in super reincarnation, right, that the world is transported, okay, and rather than melting or dissolving, it's transported to a whole other center of being, right? If you believe in super reincarnation, then there is a resurrection of the dead. I'm going to quote come to you now from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37, verses 1 through 8. If you care to check me out. The hand of the Lord, this is Ezekiel the prophet speaking. This is a very famous scene. The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of the valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them. But here is Ezekiel, right? Walking in this valley of dead bones, dry, desiccated bones, right? He led me back and forth among them. There he is pacing back and forth. And I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry, he says. God asked me, Ezekiel says, Son of man, God said, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then God said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, in other words, make them, term prophesy here doesn't mean just see things. It means do something active which you don't know what experience is. Prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come back to life. I will attach tendons to you, and make flesh come upon you, and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come back to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied, Ezekiel says. as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Okay? Yet. This is why we bury our dead, by the way. Because once, after Mashiach will have come, this is why we don't practice the incarnation, because after Mashiach will have come, after the day of judgment, when the dead are brought back to life, they are reformed, body and soul are reunited, those bones are refleshed, those bones, those desiccated bones are given marrow, they're brought back. There's the pineal gland in the back of the neck never dissolves, we're taught. It's called the luz in Hebrew, that luz bone never dissolves. And that's why we bury, so that bone and spirit can be united. That's from Ezekiel. We'll quote now from the book of Isaiah, chapter 26, verse 19. Your dead will live, my corpses will rise, awake and sing, you who dwell in the dust. For your dew is like the morning dew, and the earth will bring the ghosts to life. That dew is referred to in the Zohar as the dew that reincarnates. And now from the book of Daniel, chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of the nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is found written in the book, will be delivered. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake. Some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt. In fact, we pray for the resurrection of the dead 3 times a day. Additionally, there's a bracha in the Shmoneh Esrei in the 18th blessing, and I'll quote it for you here in English. You are mighty forever, my Lord, you resurrect the dead. We say this 3 times a day. You are powerful to save, he sustains the living with loving kindness, resurrects the dead with great mercy, supports the fallen, heals the sick, etc., etc. So we reiterate our belief in the resurrection of the dead 3 times a day. Okay. Now, that's not the end. I mean, once you come back to life, what do, right? So, I'm trying to find a certain page here. Give me a second here. Then we experience the world to come. Okay? Gosh, I can't find it. We'll deal with that. Okay. This is Talmud and Brachot, page 17a. In the world to come, there is no eating, nor drinking, nor procreation, nor commerce, nor jealousy, enmity, or rivalry, but the righteous will sit with crowns on their head and enjoy the radiance of the Shekhinah, the divine presence. Obviously, we won't have heads to have crowns on, because the kind of bodies we'll have back then, right? Someone asked a good question here about, we'll get to that in a bit. The bodies we'll have then will be bodies, but the level of the Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, was a great travelist, explained that the body in those days will be on the level of the souls that we have today. So, we will experience God up close. But the Talmud tells us that all our prophets foretell only what will happen in the days of the coming Messiah, but no eye has seen, no ear has heard God besides you. That's from Brachot 34b. In other words, experience of Olam Haba, of the world to come, is utterly inexplicable. Okay? This will be the moment when the soul reunites with God. This will be the moment when God is no longer invisible. The Talmud tells us, this is a quote I was looking for, in the world to come, all the righteous will stand around in the circle and point, there's God. God will sit in the middle. God will be manifest. Okay? Olam Haba will be unlike anything we have ever known, as that quote from Brachot just indicates, unlike anything we've ever known. The prophets couldn't explain it. The greatest sages couldn't explain it. This will be the great transportation of all. And on this level, there will be melting. There will be dissolution. There will be a dissolving process. And the ego will be subsumed into the presence of God. Whereas in the afterlife, there will still be an ego experience. Whereas in the Messianic era, there still will be an ego experience. There will be a sense of I. Whereas in the day of judgment, there will still be an individual ego who will be judged. Whereas in the resurrection of the day, when body and soul are reunited, there will be a recollection of the ego, and that dissolving process will be undone. But when that final transportation experience comes about, right, in Olam Haba, then the ego will melt. It will not dissolve. In other words, like salt and water, excuse me, or sugar and water, which leaves a taste behind. That won't be the experience of Olam Haba. When we dissolve in the presence of God, when we melt in the presence of God, the ego will be undone, and we will all be united in God's presence, and will be utterly otherwise. Finally, a good question is asked, can Jews then be organ donors? Yes. Even though it's very, very important that the entire body be buried. But donating an organ is such a high mitzvah. There are conditions. You can't just throw your organ into the mix, okay? You can't donate a lung, a kidney, part of a liver when you're still alive to a person. A great mitzvah, a very high mitzvah. So that will somehow be not be a matter of concern. But as a rule, we do not throw our organs into the mix. As a rule, we do not sign on a license plate, if that's in the event of an accident, take my organs. That we don't do. We don't just throw it into the mix because oftentimes organs are lost, and one will have not done the mitzvah one hopes to have done, and one will suffer the unfortunate consequences of that. Any more questions? Bottom line, life is not what it appears to be. Okay? Life is not at all what it appears to be. There is this manifest background, because it's manifest to the eyes of the righteous, but this manifest background will become more and more manifest, so that it will be utterly manifest, so that rather than being in the background, what had been manifest in the background more and more so will be all there was in the foreground. There will be a point when God's presence will be revealed, and we will share in that presence, and we will experience that presence. Okay? When good will come to the forefront, we look forward to those days. Praise God. We take a break next week. We'll be back with human suffering, according to the book of Sefer Kohelet, the Book of Ecclesiastes. That's 2 weeks from tonight. After that, the experience of suffering through the book of Sefer Iyov, the book of Job. Okay? We look forward to seeing you then. Be well.